right. Good morning, everyone. Appreciate you allowing us on here. Just to let you know who I am. I'm Reggie Lee. I'm the president of the board at UMing, and I'm actually the father of two UMing students, a third grader and a first grader. Um, Son started as a kindergartner, and just to elaborate on a couple of the things mentioned in the videos, we're extremely excited to be opening up another campus this coming year. Over the course of this past application season, we had 7 applicants for every open seat that was coming in. And as Alba mentioned, the best school in Alameda County, we received a National Blue Ribbon Award last year, one of 300 that went to schools throughout the country. And more importantly, like I mentioned, I'm the father of two young Black children. And my son is one of our special learners. He has a 504 plan, he's ADHD. And it has been pretty impressive. And what has led me to my volunteering is how he's been served as a student. He is above grade level in Chinese and English. He's learning math, social studies, science, all in Chinese. And in a time that we've had now with distance learning, being able to be right on the front line of what happened once we found out that schools were going to be closed, and seeing our teachers, administrators spring into action and put together a full curriculum over the course of 3 or 4 days was pretty amazing. And it's continued into the fall. I mean, we just had our fall survey that went out, and currently right now our attendance is over 99% every day. It's been very impressive seeing that my son, basically as a third grader, is fluent in Mandarin Chinese. I don't speak it, my wife doesn't speak it, but it's a pretty amazing opportunity for our kids to be prepared for what's ahead in the future. I highly recommend, if you have rising kindergartners, to please consider UMing. It's an outstanding school that is looking at improving over the time. And like I said, I wouldn't have taken on the roles I've had in the school if I didn't believe that we were heading in the right direction. So once again, thank you for having us. And please look us up if you have any questions.
Thank you, Reggie and Alba. Alba, is there a contact email that you can put in the chat if folks need more information?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to send the link in a little poster so you guys can have that information so you can post it on your website.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'll also include my UMing email address too. If anybody has any questions they want to send straight to me, that's fine.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you. Great opportunity. If you're interested, please reach out. So really quick, just some Zoom basics. If you have a question, you can either type it in the chat. If something resonates with you, please type it in the chat. If you have a question, you can also use the raise hand function, and either myself or Dara will jump in when timing makes sense. And then once we call on you, just unmute yourself and ask your question. Really quick, this is the Fatherhood Partnership. I just want to make sure everybody understands what it means to be part of the partnership. The partnership was established in 2018. The point of it was to create father-specific parenting education and support groups. So if you are here and a part of this, we are expecting that you are here because you're interested in building your capacity to offer father-specific parenting and education groups. Each one of these trainings, Fatherhood Partnership trainings, whatever the topic is, it's about how do you talk to dads in a small group setting about this particular topic. So again, this training today is coming from the frame of how do you talk to dads in a small group setting about police violence and the trauma that is caused by police violence. So as I mentioned at the launch last month, this year we are able to offer small mini grants to organizations, to qualified organizations. And right now I'm going to share some important dates as far as those mini grants are concerned. So the application for these mini grants will be released on October 26th. On October 30th, there will be an online application information session that is not required, but strongly encouraged, just so you can get more information, ask any questions you may have about the application. On November 16th, that will be the due date. It's not a long application. We're asking folks for 3 pages or less. It'll look like a long application because the application is about 7 or 8 pages long, but that includes the scoring rubric, background on the Father's Corps, background on the Fatherhood Partnership. But the actual application itself is about 12 questions, and that includes all of your contact information. So it is not a long application. December 14th, funding decisions will be made, and we expect all participants, like I said, if you're here because you want to launch virtual fathers groups. So I know that the funding decisions will be made in December, and then we expect groups to be launched. But the idea is that you guys are preparing to launch these groups now, preparing to launch them. So we expect groups to launch by the end of January. So these are important dates. All of this will be included in the application, obviously. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me directly, and I can answer any questions you may have. But these are the important dates for the Fatherhood Partnership mini grants. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Yes, Brooke, this grant is open only to Alameda County programs. The funding is directly from First 5 Alameda County. The grant is open only to Alameda County, but you are more than welcome to be part of the partnership. And at this point, I'm going to introduce Reggie Lyles. Reggie has been working with the Father's Corps for several years now. He's a retired captain, and he really understands the culture of policing, particularly the culture of policing not only in the country, but particularly in the Bay Area. So Reggie, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can say more about yourself and get into your portion of the training.
Hello, it's good to be here, and it's good to see you all here. It's always good when I hear the first voice come out as another Reggie. So that was interesting to me. So I have spent 30 years in law enforcement. I've worked in Berkeley for 20 years. I left there as a captain, and then I came over to Nevada, which is in Marin County, and retired as a captain. And then I spent some time as a deputy chief while they selected a new chief. I am going to present my perspective. I'm a theologian. I've got a master's divinity degree and a bachelor's degree from San Francisco State, and a divinity degree from ABSW. Having said that, I'm going to talk about the relationship between policing in America from the perspective of those who it hasn't worked well for. So I want you to know that while I love police officers, I don't love rogue policing. And so I'm going to speak from the perspective of those who have been hurt and abused, and we just have to face it. So it's not the status quo I'm advocating for change. So let me know, Kevin, when we should get started.
Reggie, we can go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Okay, so navigating police brutality from the perspective of African-American and people of color, that perspective, it needs to be navigated. The relationship between law enforcement and people of color has been adversarial for generations, since 1619. And that's when we was brought here from West Africa and South Africa and East Africa as slaves. But they didn't bring slaves, they brought chiefs, they brought hunters, they brought holy men, they brought parents, and they were enslaved when we got to America in 1619. So the statistics have overwhelmingly showed that the police praxis, or what they say they do, have been both harmful and deadly to fathers and their children, and especially their sons. In other words, statistics have proven that African-American males and male people of color have been targeted with this rogue policing. Research showed that police officers nationwide adhere to their motto. This is the praxis. This is their theory, excuse me. This is what they say they are: to protect, and serve. And I believe that. In California, police officers, as well as others throughout the nation, stand with this and with their right hand lifted, and we solemnly swear and affirm that we will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of California. Thus, the motto to which each officer tends to live by, neither found in the United States Constitution or that of the individual states. But parents should understand there's a significance in navigating there's a gap between theory and practice. When parents become fully knowledgeable of the gap between theory and practice as it relates to the practice of training in law enforcement, they're better equipped when teaching and encouraging their children on strategies to use when surviving a police encounter. Now, this is not all police officers. We always have to make that perfectly clear. We're not talking about all police officers, but when it comes to African-American males and male children, it's around 10%, and that's a vast number. It's important that these statistics be honest and truthful, ensuring that they will not debilitate and to terrorize their children's psychological development and creative aspirations. We don't want parents to frighten their children so much that they can't think, but they must think if they look like me, and in order to survive, in order to navigate police brutality. So let's get on our journey here. What will you walk away with knowing today? The goal of this conversation today will be to give parents and advocates information and suggestions on how best to teach their children and advocate groups on how to survive the pedestrian stop and how to survive the traffic stop, to give parents and advocate the history and language and definitions and statistics and academic research on police cultural information on causes for the dichotomy between police behavior when engaging African-American and people of color. So let's go to the pedestrian stop.
Reggie, really quick, did you want us to see your PowerPoint, or are you bringing it up later? We don't see it.
You can't see it?
No, not right now.
Oh my God, I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
Let me, I thought it was being shared.
Not yet. Okay. And for everyone, we will email both PowerPoints out at the conclusion of the training. Thanks, Reggie.
Okay, we'll just push on.
Yeah.
Surviving the pedestrian stop. These are the 10 suggestions that are effective to teach your children. Number one, be polite and respectful when stopped by the police, and keep your mouth closed. I want to stress that. You don't want them saying any utterances or statements beyond what was asked of them. Not to talk, because all of that will be used against them. Remember that your goal is to get home safely. If you feel that your rights have been violated, you and your parents have the right to file a formal complaint with the local police jurisdiction. Now, this is critically important because your child is at school and your child is being taught about the Constitution and their rights and et cetera, and they're fraternizing with other young people in their peer group, and they don't have these problems. So why can't I talk back? Why can't I say, why did you stop me? No, we don't need that extra conversation. Don't, under any circumstances, get into any argument with any police officer. I know you know your rights, son. I know you haven't done anything wrong, but if you're standing on the corner of 86 and D in East Oakland and it's 12 o'clock at night, that's not the time to be Johnny Cockerel. That's just not the time to do that. We don't want to argue your case under those circumstances. Always remember that anything you say or do can be used against you in court. Anything. Keep your hands in plain sight and make sure the police can see them. Law enforcement has abused this. They have killed, people have ended up dead because someone said, I didn't see his hands was moving, and in the mind of the officer, this is our Supreme Court said this, it doesn't matter what the citizen was doing. The only thing that matters is what's in the mind of the officer. So the officer could say, I didn't see his hands, and he could have had a gun, he could have had a bazooka. All of that stuff that I'm telling you is more than likely untrue. It happens rarely, but it does happen. But most of the time, overwhelmingly, it's not true. But folks end up being shot, beaten up, because I didn't see his hands. So keep your hands in plain sight at all times. It's not, you're not being masculine or non-masculine by showing your hands. You're being smart. Avoid physical contact with the police. No sudden movements. They call them furtive gestures. That's the legal term. Keep your hands out of your pockets. Keep your hands out of your waist. This is not the time to fix your pants or go inside your coat or jacket or go back with your head. Don't do any of those gestures. Do not run. Even if you're afraid, do not run. We can get you out of jail. We can get you a good attorney. We want you to survive this. We want you to live. So running is almost a statement unofficially that this person is guilty, and when you run from me, I can do something to you. Now I understand this because I've ran from the police. I was raised in North Oakland around Bushrod Park. So I know I ran from the police, but it wasn't smart then, it's not smart now. Even if you believe you're innocent, do not resist arrest. Police put their hands on you, it's better to just cooperate. Don't make any statements about the incident until you're able to meet with your lawyer, your parents, public defender, etc. So you don't have anything to say. Matter of fact, teach your children, especially your male children, to say, I want to see my parents, I want to see my lawyer, and stop talking. I want to see my parents, I want to see my lawyer. Stay calm, remain in control, watch your words, watch your body language and emotions. Now that's a lot to give to a 15-year-old that's going through puberty, that feels like they haven't done anything wrong, and they may not have. But this is something we have to make sure they understand so they can survive. Now, surviving the traffic stop. Do not panic. Now, I'm especially speaking to Black men and women now, because even if you don't admit it, when that police car comes around you and it starts with the lights and the siren, hearts racing. I don't know if that happens that much with white citizens or Asians. I just don't know. I tend to doubt it. But in our case, we become panicked, and rightfully so, because that's usually the start of something very negative to happen. So try to hold on and hold your emotions. If a traffic officer is following you and turns on his siren, safely and quickly pull over as far as possible. Don't drive too far. Do not bend over like you put something under your seat or in your glove box at all. Once you once you've pulled over, feel free to show the officer a few token courtesies. I would smile, speak clearly, make no quick movements. Consider that at this point, you have a little to lose and perhaps something to gain. This is chess we're playing, right? It's your move. It's better now to smile at the officer, like you're unafraid and you're not panic stricken because you haven't done anything wrong. First, fully roll down your window, turn off the engine, place your hands in the steering wheel. If it's dark, turn on your interior lights. Do not rummage through your back pocket for your wallet, your license. Don't go to the glove compartment, the registration. Don't do any of that. Don't do any searches at all. Avoid giving the officer any reason to search. Should you get out the car, an officer who stops you for an alleged traffic violation has the right to insist that you and your passengers get out the car. You should do so if asked, but do not get out the car unless asked. Officers have interpreted that as a threat. And young people have interpreted it as, hey, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm coming to the authority, the teacher, the gym coach, my parents, but stay in the car. However, when many police officers prefer that you stay in your car and will tell you to remain in it, you start to get out, cooperate. If you get out the car against the officer's orders, do not be surprised if he pulls a gun on you. Getting out the car may signal to the officer that you're about to do something to him, pull a weapon. Now, or even worse, that rarely happens. I'm say it again, it rarely happens, but the media makes it make the public think that every time some Black person is pulled over, the police officer is going to be killed. That's not the case. That's bad training, horrible training. If an officer has any reason to believe that you might be dangerous or he has the right to conduct a quick pat down of your outer clothing while standing next to you, he has that right. So cooperate, don't say anything, be quiet. Why are you stopping me? What are you doing this for? Why are you doing this to me? Do not get embarrassed. Do not feel like you have to resist him in any kind of way. Don't say anything. He's patting you down to search for a concealed weapon. You've never had a weapon in your life. Why is he doing this to me? This is how he's trained. Should it happen to everybody? No, it shouldn't. Does it happen to everybody? No, it does not. Does it happen more to Black kids than white kids? Yes. That's the way the world is, unfortunately. I don't like it. I saw it. And when I became in authority, I did my best to reduce it. But it's still out there prevalently. So it can happen. If the officer wants to go inside and search your car, teach your children to say, you do not have permission. Not scream it, not shout it. Officer, you do not have permission to search my car. And just say it over and over again. You don't have permission to search my car. We have the luxury, if they kept their video and audio cameras on, to pick that information up. And if you're calm and you say, you don't have permission to search my car, they cannot search your car. Unless they see a kilo of weed in the back seat or a bazooka in the front seat, then they can go in and search your car. But if you don't have anything like that, you have not doing anything wrong, just make sure you speak calmly into his chest where the microphone is and say, you don't have the right to search my car. When an officer approaches, remember to wait until they speak to you. When responding, avoid using language that can be interpreted as defensive or hostile. This is not the time to talk, so your boys can hear it. So your boys can show how tough you are. We don't need to use profanity. Remember your tone. This is chess we're playing. It's a bad move, horrible move to start MFing and cursing and blah, 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 blah. You don't need to do that. And I know your children won't do it, but we don't know what happens when he's in front of his girlfriend or in front of his boys and he's got the save face. So you got to address that with your children. Son, we're playing chess here. We want you to survive this. Do not use profanity. Dad, I'll never use profanity. Good. I just want to go over it. Don't use any profanity and talk in a calm voice. If they ask you for your license registration, Sim says, okay, sure. Do not, why are you asking me for this? Horrible question. They have a right to ask you for it, and that's it. Now, if your child is driving your car and they're going out on a date with his girlfriend or whatever, with his boys or whatever, it might be wise to put that registration over the visor. So all you got to do is drop the visor, hit it, and the registration comes down. That's a little technique that you can teach your child when they're driving, so they won't be going in to the glove box. Well, what's wrong with going in the glove box? Everybody else does it. Yeah, but for us, it's always interpreted that, oh, he was going to get a gun or he made a move to do something wrong. If you remember Philando Castile, he was with his girlfriend and their child in the car, and he had a license to carry a weapon. The officer asked him, sir, do you have any weapons in the car? And Philando Castile, who worked at a school as a janitor for years, said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I do have a weapon on me, and I have a license to carry it. So he went to get his wallet out. Boom, 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 boom. He was killed. Philando Castile, African American. That's what we have to be careful about. One of the first things about a traffic cops learn in police academy is decide before he even gets out the car if they're gonna give a ticket or not. So you can't talk your way out the ticket. Just remember that. Now I'm gonna say this, and I don't want you to interpret this as being sexy or sexist, but women have a better way, a better opportunity to get out of a citation than men if it's a male officer. That happens. Those are the facts. Ain't no sense trying to change it. But young women, attractive women, and they have a better opportunity to get out than older women. But if it's a woman, a female police officer, you ain't getting out that ticket. Because I don't care what happens. They don't move like that. But male officers do. So if they have a made up mind before getting out the car, just accept what's happening to you. Citation is just money. You can go to court. We can fight your case then. We want you to survive this. Now, we want you to cooperate. I'm saying that again. If the officer is trying to be open-minded and friendly toward you and is asking you probing questions and all of that, don't fall for that. The officer's not your friend here. He's enforcing the law. That's a technique. That's a strategy. We're playing chess now, remember. Guy is coming to you and saying, oh, yeah, don't you play basketball? You seem like a nice guy. And then you start talking. No, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do any of that. Keep your mouth shut. Only answer what is asked of you, and be careful, be attentive of what you're doing and what's happening around you. If the officer appears to hesitate, relax and cooperate. Hesitating is a technique that officers learned in the academy. It's used to extract admission and statements out of you. So you don't want to buy into that. Well, you know, you seem like a nice guy. Just tell me, where you guys going? What are you doing? Keep your mouth shut. The strategy is used to try to get you to admit either that you committed the violation. Well, you were going 75 miles an hour. Don't admit to anything. Remember, all of this is being recorded. All of it is being recorded. Also remember, the police officer doesn't have to turn on the recorder. The recorder records 5 minutes even before they push the button to turn it on. When they come in close contact with people, the recording starts. You need to understand that. Relax, be attentive, stay woke. You most likely will be asked open-ended questions by officers, such as questions to use to elicit answer to imply your guilt. Do you know why I stopped you? No. You know how fast you was going? Yeah, I know how fast I was going. Never say, no, I don't know how fast I was going. Why? Because you know the speed limit. You got to rehearse that with your children when they're going. Do you know how fast you was going? Yes, sir, I do. And just leave it at that. I got you going 55 miles an hour. Well, either don't say anything or I disagree. Stop talking. If the officer then tells you how fast he or she thinks you are going, don't argue with him. Give the non-committal answer like I see, or remain silent. Remember, silence is not an admission of any guilt. Okay, the police officer is not allowed to search your car unless you give them permission. If they see contraband, like I said earlier, they can go into your car. But they can't just get out the car and search in your car. Just say again, you're not allowed to search my car. I'm not giving you permission. But if they push you out the way and go into your car, don't be alarmed, just be calm. You're winning that case. Anything they find in your car will be thrown out. Let me stop right here. If you think police officers, or some police officers, I want to be clear about this, don't stash things into your car or in your possession, then you're naive. They do it. Oakland Police Department now is under a 17-year consent decree authority because that's what they were doing. So we're not going to debate the fact that if some officers don't drop contraband or weapons on certain folk. It does happen. It does happen.
Reggie, we've got a question in the chat.
Yeah.
If the police officer smells contraband, does that give them permission to search the car?
You know, smelling marijuana and all of that, I would say, no, I'm not giving you permission to search my car. And if it comes out later in court that they smelled marijuana, your lawyer can argue that. And 9 out of 10 times, you'll win that case. Smelling alcohol, I smelled alcohol on his breath, and therefore I went into his car and I found blah, 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 that they placed in there. Well, the alcohol on your breath could be mouthwash. The marijuana that they thought they smelled could have come from outside or any environment. You're not guilty because someone said they smelled something. Matter of fact, smelling is the least viable a piece of evidence to be used against you, right?
Thank you.
Well, I think we covered this, that the officers can frisk you. Always allow them to do that. Always allow them to do that. Never push back or be difficult. Always allow them to do that. And when they have probable cause or reasonable basis to believe that you are a passenger, and that you or your passenger are involved in criminal activity, they can search your car and objects belonging in your car. If your car fits the description of a 211 robbery that just occurred, and you fit the description of that, and they're doing safe, they can get you out of the car and look into the car. Searching though, it has to have permission. If they look in your car and they don't see anything, they don't have a right to search. They can't go in your glove box. They can't go in your trunk. They cannot, I'm gonna say it again, they cannot go in your trunk without your permission. So don't give it.
Reggie, can male officers frisk female citizens?
Yes,
Okay.
they can. And we've had a lot of problem with that, but they definitely can.
Okay.
You know, and there's some problems with that. If you feel that you've been molested, then now's not the time to scream and holler about it, but you talk right into his chest. You're putting your hands on my buttocks.
Mm-hmm.
You should not touch me there.
Mm-hmm.
All that's being recorded.
Thank you.
Okay.
Reggie, can you explain the difference between like a frisk and like a pat down versus like police putting their hands in my pockets or in my purse?
Okay. In your pocket and in your purse are searches. Pat and frisk are just synonymous, you know, just a different word for the same thing, right? Pat down, I always patted people down with my palms out like that and pat it down. And what you're looking for is some object that has form and shape to it. This is just a spray bottle and it has hard edges to it. Then if you feel that in someone's pocket, you can go in because you have probable cause to believe it could be a weapon. Amen. But if you don't have anything in your pocket, I mean, I got a license to carry a weapon, but the way I look in America, I don't carry a weapon. I wouldn't have my child walking around with no knife in their pocket, folding knife. I would not in this day and age. You don't need nunchuck sticks and all that stuff. You know, you don't, no. And then you have to explain why. And then you got to say, well, because they're going to say, well, John, well, Michael, so-and-so's a boy. I'm a Boy Scout. I'm an Eagle Scout. Why can't I have my pocket knife? No, you cannot have it because of who we are in America.
Reggie, we have a hand up from Andrea.
Go ahead.
Andrea, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Hi, I wanted to go back to when you were discussing when a police officer tries to make chit chat and kind of to elicit more information. And your suggestion was to stay silent. How do you really suggest that happen without it coming off as rude or like antagonizing the situation from like getting
okay, this is a matter of training. This is why we're having this. The implication is by the dominant society, if they ask you a question and you don't answer immediately, you are being obstinate. But you have a right to remain silent. This is constitutional. That's what I want you to tell your children. And this is chess again, and it's the best chess move for you. I don't care if the police officer thinks I'm rude or insulting him or whatever. I'm not trying to please him. I'm trying to protect myself. And I'm not saying not to respond. I'm trying to get you to teach your children to respond in staccato sentences. And I know if you had a teenage son like I had, they're good at this, right? They know how to say one-word responses. That's what we want you to say. We don't want them to think that while a person is being nice to them, that you can just talk your way out of this. And what you're doing is talking your way into more trouble. Am I making myself clear, Andrea?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, their appeasement is not what we're after. And so that's going to take some training because, after all, African Americans have been trained to make white folk comfortable first, then make ourselves comfortable. That's our acculturation. And even though people are offended by those kind of statements, that's America. You know, you insulted him. Why? You didn't respond. I have a right to not respond. What is the Supreme Court justice doing today after every question she's getting? She's just not responding. You know, so you got a right to not respond. So I want to get through these definitions, because these are the definitions that I want you to understand from the perspective of your family, your children. A common understanding offers individuals an open platform to discuss freely their ideas and beliefs that will help us to overcome and become unified in the environment which we find ourselves. I'll just stop right there. We need a common language with your family and your children and your neighbors who are being stopped by police and who are most apt to be adversely affected by the rogue police officer. So that's the perspective of which I'm coming from. If you have never had a problem with the police, and the police are your friend and blah, 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 more power to you, hallelujah. But I'm speaking, so to African Americans, people of color, police brutality is defined as unwarranted, excessive, and often illegal force against civilians. That is what police brutality is. Forms of police brutality have ranged from assaults and batteries, beatings, mayhem, torture, murder, kidnapping. Some broader definition of police brutality also encompasses harassment, molestation, false arrest, intimidation, verbal abuse, among other forms of mistreatment. Lying on police reports. Do police officers lie on police reports? Ask yourself that. If you say, oh, no, they don't, then you're not an African American or you've never been affected by this situation. They do. And not do all of them do it? No. So don't go back and tell your cousin, your uncle that Reggie Lau said all police officers lie on police reports. No, it's a small percentage of them. But who are they directed their effect to? To us. So don't get in a situation when your son comes home and disbelieve your child. I want you to believe your child until proven otherwise. African-American scholar, filmmaker Omowale Akintunde states that racism is a systemic societal institution, omnipresent and embedded phenomenon that pervades every vestige of our reality. For most whites, however, racism is like murder. The concept exists, but someone must commit an action for it to happen. This limited view of such a multi-layered syndrome cultivates the sinister nature of racism and in fact perpetuates the racist phenomenon rather than eradicates them. So racism is a system. It's a structure. It's not an event. Although it can be an event, but it's not an event. George Floyd was murdered by an officer who had 17 different cases against him. And he had killed or were involved in a homicide, 3 other homicides before George Floyd. That system. Why wasn't he not working years before he ran into George Floyd? The system protected him, promoted him, made him a field trading officer, put him back on the street. So it's the system that we're talking about when we're talking about racism. White supremacy. White supremacy means to allude only to self-conscious racism of white supremacist hate group. It refers instead to a political, economic, cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control the power, the material resources, the consciousness and unconscious ideas of white superiority, entitlement are widespread in the relationship of white dominance and non-white subordination are daily reenacted across the board array of institution and social settings. Almost through here. White privilege. White privilege is a societal privilege that benefits white people over non-white people in a society, particularly if they are otherwise under the same social, political, economic circumstances. I'll just cut through the chase. Dylan Roof walked into a church, killed 9 folks. He was walked out of there, handcuffed without incident, and brought to the station. On his way to the station, they stopped and got him a hamburger. Just want you to know that. But black folks, if you're in a situation that even is less violent and ugly as that shooting that was there, just the car stop, your tail light is out, or something like that, you can end up dead. That's critically important to see the injustice of that. That's white privilege. White privilege means that they can walk around the store and not be followed. They can talk back to police officers and not be arrested. They can argue with police officers and not be arrested. They can say, officer, my name is Professor so-and-so and so-and-so, and I live over there. And they'll say, okay, Professor so-and-so, you can go. But I, former Captain Lyles, would be stopped here in Marin County, and I tell them that, and they'd say, show me your ID. You know, prove it. And then when I show them the ID, they'll ask me questions like, do you know James so-and-so? A test. Put me to a test, right? So does that happen everywhere in America? Yes. And if you don't think it happens everywhere in America, I don't know what to say. That's privilege. Privilege means that I see somebody bird watching and he tells me this is an area where you should have a leash on your dog, and I call the police on him, knowing and threaten him. I'm gonna call the police, knowing full well something might happen to you. Peggy McIntosh, for sake of time, I'm gonna speed through this. Peggy McIntosh has this knapsack that's online. You can get it, saying white privilege, unpacking the invisible knapsack. I wanna recommend that you go get that, read that, explain that to your children, because she goes into about 30 different activities that an individual can do who happens to be white and does not cause any alarm to anyone. But you do those same 30 instances, and you can be called, the police can be called on you, and then you never know what can happen. Go ahead. So it's called White Privilege, Unpacking the Individual Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. It's probably the best thing that I've ever seen. But white backlash, this is the negative reaction by some white people to non-white advancement, or being in a place where, or stereotypically, non-white people are not usually, causing white people to respond either verbally, physically, or calling the police. You're walking in, your child is walking in the area in Piedmont, but you guys live in Sobrani Park. And they're walking in Piedmont. Can he walk in Piedmont? Yes. Is it anything illegal about that? No. Will the police be called on him? Yes. And that's what we got to understand. That's the white backlash. You know, they don't have backlash like that. They don't suffer from it. So when you talk to them about it, they go like, I never experienced that. Well, that's not a good answer. You never experienced it. Dominant group status threat. This is the threat that you have, that they feel that you are, when they see or perceive that you're doing something as well as them or better. And then they respond in a certain way. Now, the best case that we can think about happened right here in the Bay Area. Right after Toronto beat my Warriors in the Coliseum. And Ujiri, who is the general manager of the Toronto Raptors, walked down to the courtside to celebrate with his team. He's the general manager of the Toronto Raptors. He's 6'7" and good looking. He probably had on a $6,000 suit and $2,000 gaiters. He's got his pass that he pulls out of his pocket and he's holding it up. And what happens? The Alameda County Sheriff Deputy pushed him. He said, "Why are you pushing me?" And he walked up and pushed him a second time. And then people from on the court came over and grabbed the officer and said, "Why are you doing this? This is our general manager." The officer then sued Ujiri for assaulting him. But you know how it is in America. Everybody got a camera, and there's the camera showing that the officer made the whole thing up. So what prompted him to attack Ujiri, who was not doing anything? He doesn't know him. They don't run the same circles. It's the perception that somebody is doing better than me. How does this parlay to us? I wouldn't let my son drive around in my brand new Mercedes-Benz. If you got a second car, let him drive in the other car. Let him drive that Chevy, because that's why they stop him. What is this young guy doing driving like that? And then they come and now we got a problem. Where'd you steal the car? Almost finished here. Well, it's been proven over and over that more Black people and brown people are stopped by police officers. This is a fact now. This is not even debatable. And Verve, if you can show that video, I'd appreciate it. And I'm done.
Can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Yes, I will. Yes, I will.
Thank you.
This story starts with innocence, just like this young man, Najari Smith, and his passion to ride bikes.
When I think of bicycle, there's something that's really, really magical, spiritual about that. It brings people together.
That's exactly what he did. The Richmond native co-founded a youth bicycle group, bringing the neighborhood together every first Friday of the month. But the musical tradition took an unexpected turn on August 3rd, 2018.
We were leaving out of the intersection. Police officer comes over and grabs my handlebar. Who was the problem? Why he stopped me? He told me that he was stopping me from playing loud music.
I can barely hear it.
Violating a noise ordinance. He spent 2 nights in jail with a $5,000 bond. Why do you think he was arrested?
Bicycling while Black, driving while Black, walking while Black, dancing while Black, existing while Black. It's assassinating the reality here in America.
It's a grim reality everywhere, especially in Oakland. According to an ABC7 analysis of police traffic stop data, Black men are 8 times more likely to be stopped by police than white men, and 3 times more likely to be stopped than Hispanic men. For Oakland native Gary Jenkins, it happened in his driveway.
The officer thought that I was suspicious. You're like, well, you pulled over. I said, well, I left right here. I said, would you like to support me? But he still sent me to jail.
Gentry's story is all too familiar. ABC7's data analysis shows that 86% of Black men and women in Oakland who were stopped were not arrested.
Oh, yeah.
Civil rights attorney John Burris sees it all the time.
Innocent people are being stopped. Now, when they get stopped, they get searched, they get handcuffed, and then they don't find them.
According to the most recent police data from 2018, African Americans make up 55% of police stops, despite representing roughly 23% of the population.
You gotta bring these numbers down.
So what did the Oakland Police Department think about it?
We initiated.
I sat down with Pittsburgh Police Chief Susan Manheim, who was appointed after these incidents occurred, but she recognizes there's a problem.
Before, we used to cast the
wide net, and it was based on geographic or suspect information. But today we are able, on precision-based intelligence-led policing, to actually get the officers the information to make informed stops. Informed stops, also known as intelligence-led policing, it started in 2016. For example, of vehicles wanted in homicides, shootings, or robberies, we get this officers the information.
So is the strategy working? ABC7's analysis found more than 2,200 white men and women were stopped in 2018. Yet there were more than 10,800 African Americans stopped during the same time period. But less than half were based on intelligence-led stops. So what happened to the other 60% of stops?
We're here. Where we are.
What would you say to those who criticize it's not good enough? Oh, we agree. In Oakland,
Stop now. I don't think, I'm not hearing it well. I'm not hearing it well, so I don't know if everyone else heard that like I heard it.
No, the volume was low.
Yeah, I'm gonna include these in the videos when we share all the information. Everybody will have access to these videos later.
Let me just cap it by saying this, that Oakland has been studied for almost 20 years now, and the problem is still going on, that Black men are being stopped, and they don't know why. They can't, and they have no control over their own force. It's just racist. There's no two ways about it. Of the 55% of the stops that they make, they only cite or arrest about 14% of the people. So the rest of the people, what was your justification for making those stops? And that's why they then they get real angry with you for asking those kind of questions. But so if you're moving in and out of Oakland right now, and you look like me, you're more apt to be stopped by the police, even when you're not doing anything wrong, even when you're totally innocent. So if your child comes home and tells you that this happened to them, etc., you know, believe them. Believe them, because it probably did happen. Again, I want to end by saying this is not every police officer. The majority of them are good, fine people, but we're not focusing on them. We're focusing on the ones who give us the most misery, and etc. So I'll end with that. Thanks,
Reggie. You're right. It's not all, but it's not one or two that are making all those stops either. So
you're right, Kevin. Analogy like it's one apple in the barrel. No.
Right.
Well,
right.
It's orchard. We got an orchard problem.
We've got an orchard issue.
An apple orchard issue.
Yes, agreed. Reggie, really quick before we turn it over to Beverly to talk about the trauma that's caused by not only these police shootings and seeing these police shootings, but just the daily stops and dehumanization that we experience at times when we are stopped by the police. Just a quick question. When the sheriff gets caught just outright lying like that with the Toronto president, is there any, do they do any looking back into his other cases? Because you can't tell me that's the first time that this brother has done something that was inappropriate. It's
not only did they look back into his cases, they found stuff in his cases.
I'm sure they did.
they found that he had been caught on a disability case, trying to game the system on a disability injury case, and was found guilty and had to repay money to clear that up. He was sued by the state of California. He lost. And so why is he still working as a sheriff? Why is he still in that position at the Oakland Coliseum? That's what I mean by systemic racism. And if we had more time, I can recite more cases that are just shocking. Yeah. These officers go from one mess up to another mess up to another mess up when they should be terminated.
Right.
The system allows them and protects them. But when I was working, I had to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that if I lied on a police report, my career was gone.
Mm-hmm.
These guys say, and he had a weapon in his back pocket. And your son says, Mom, I didn't have any weapon. Believe your son.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Reggie. It's always sobering to hear you present on this topic. So thank you very much. And we'll be sharing his slides with you. Virve will be sending out a link sometime next week. Right now, we're going to turn it over to Beverly Kyer. Beverly has been working with the Fathers Corps since we started, I think, Beverly. And Beverly's going to talk about the trauma that is caused by these police interactions and also seeing it constantly on television. So Beverly, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Good is afternoon now. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Glad to be with you. Just a little bit about my background. I was an elementary school teacher, sixth grader in New York City years ago, but the aspects of challenges and struggles and challenges that children had, made me decide to go back and get a degree in social work so that I could really address those things. My first assignment was working with children with cancer and leukemia in a pediatrics oncology unit. So you can see I was already invested in childhood trauma. And then I got an invitation to come work in a collaboration of the Department of Defense and the VA Medical Center to learn how to diagnose and treat veterans returning from Vietnam with post-traumatic stress disorder. But my training really delved me into trauma. And part of what brings me to this too, me leaping ahead a little bit, is I really begin to learn what motivates, what drives the behavior of young people. It really pushed me to a place of saying, what can you expect? I'm looking at a Kevin here, I'm looking at Brooke, I'm looking at LaDonna. What can you expect your children to do? How do you expect them to behave or react in a situation if you don't really know what's driving that behavior? So I really begin to look at the chemistry changes in the brain and the body that could make that. And I wanted to talk to you today about understanding that so that you could help shift that whole process. After working with the veterans for 16 years, as I also worked with veterans who had still survived from Korea and World War II, I went into child welfare 100% with a number of agencies of children institutionalized care, which led me to an awful lot of work alongside with law enforcement probation. I got tremendous respect for law enforcement on either side of the realm. I've met the best and I've met the worst. I've also experienced some of the worst myself as well. Nevertheless, I do believe that we, to the best of our ability, could help the fathers understand what to expect, as Reggie so brilliantly and comprehensively pointed out, but how to prepare your children, how to condition your children, how to know your children enough to be able to anticipate how they may respond and react in those various kinds of scenarios that Reggie pointed out. And that's what we want to do. I needed to open up my slide. Hold on just a moment so that we could get to business and look at this. And I need you to tell me right away, Kevin, that you could see my slides. Yes, no?
I can see your slides. It seems like you're muted now, Beverly. You're muted, Beverly.
I got it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Couldn't find the mute button. Sorry. Okay. So we're going to look at the effects of racism. Let me say this too. I so believe in the power of groups. Some of the best work I've been able to accomplish with men in particular is through group work, working with the veterans in that aspect, because it does a number of things. The commonality is powerful for people to share what they struggle with, what they don't know, the learning opportunities. If people have different and diverse ideas about this situation, what to do about it, what not to do about it, what to say, what not to say, it just opens up for shared kind of learning processes. Also, you could expect when you're starting groups that there are going to be grave differences. And I choose not to be alarmed by that because I still think that those are opportunities to insert. It's important to understand where people are, where they land, what they think, what their past history and experiences had led them to believe about this situation. If you don't understand it, you don't know how to address it. So I just highly respect the group. But we're going to look at some of the effects of racism on the children's health and on their development. What are the neurophysiological impacts on that? First of all, I want you to understand and help them to understand the brain and the body's traumatic effects due to police violence. And not just police violence, because many children have come already with some trauma history, whether they have observed it elsewhere outside of themselves or not, but there's already memory imprints about trauma that has started to activate a certain part of the brain, that they're more alert, they're more aroused, they're more hypervigilant, they're more ramped up than the norm. But I want you to understand it's already there. Understand also their potential for emotional and behavioral reactions to police. Think of any threat that you've ever experienced before. Sometimes you respond in a way that might be helpful, and sometimes even we respond. You said, in retrospect, I should have handled that so much different. I could have acted quicker, I could have said slow, I could have shut my mouth, or maybe I should have said something. But begin to understand what the possibilities are for your child's emotional and behavioral reactions. We also want to be able to communicate to the children. It is critical to tell them the truth about the history of racism, again, which Reggie poured out so eloquently, to understand with that. But see, we want to talk about the risks and the safety factors, That's why it's important to do that. Some people feel that maybe I don't want them to be frightened. Maybe I don't want them to know the worst. And we think that that is quite a mistake to do. There are risks. There's also a delicate balance between what are their rights and what are the safety factors. So consider that as well. But these are some of the things we're going to do. In doing groups, what I'm sharing with you is not the whole history that Reggie said to you, but I want you to use these slides more as like talking points, common points, even some activities that you will bring up during the group process. Just things that I believe that should be on the table when you're talking to them, but break them down into small segments for group discussion. So we're going to address some of the effects of racism, police, the child's health and development. We're going to explore how the fathers address the balance between teaching your children rights and teaching them how to come home alive, which is a critical thing. Actually, it trumps your rights. It absolutely trumps your rights. We want to consider types of communications for fathers to engage in to inspire their children, to employ wisdom that overrides some of that misguided pride. I was among one of my experiences, I was married to, my husband was from the Virgin Islands, and he grew up in an area where when you worked hard, you had earned a certain amount of respect. It was just a different kind of thing about the respects of people of color where he grew up. And so we were stopped by the police on a few occasions because he was a successful businessman. We had a nice car, we were going someplace, we were kind of dressed nice, and that kind of alarms some people, and they pulled us over. But what he did, based on where he came from, is he kept demanding. He says, "Why are you stopping the officer? There's no need to do this." Demanding answers. He's demanding answers, demanding respect. He was not going to get in New York City, where they did not have the same kind of cultural belief system about Black and brown as they did in the Virgin Islands. And that got us thrown down on the curb and patted down in the most disrespectful kinds of ways. But you want to teach them that. I wanted to say to him, and we had to ultimately learn to say to our children, is that you don't demand your rights when the police officers have shown you that they don't care about your rights, and they're beginning to get nervous, agitated, increasingly anger. So you kind of drop that pride thing and step into a place where the police begins to calm down. Oh, hopefully they could calm down. According to our Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke, I think most of you, all of you probably know her, racism is a threat to our children, and it produces a toxic stress, and it's different from the other two stresses, which I'm going to illustrate for you in just a moment. Some of the stresses that we face all the time are positive stresses, some of them are tolerable stresses, and it alters. Now, when it's toxic, it alters the architecture of the brain. And also Dr. Bruce Perry would even said, it begins to wear the body out. The chemical reaction begins to break down body systems. It impairs organs, it impairs the functions. But here's an activity that you may want to create. Using a flip chart, you may want to go through the group and ask them to kind of like look at what is positive stresses, what are tolerable stresses, and then compare them to the toxic stresses. I would give them, what are some examples? You would just have them, if they look at positive stress. Obviously, those are things, those are just little everyday kinds of stresses, normal kinds of stresses. It could be surprise, it's your birthday, or it could be an inoculation for a flu shot. When people have a healthy development, there's a little brief interactions with their heart rate or a mild elevation in the hormone level. But when we reassure them, the dad reassures them as a caring parent, they easily get back to normal. And somebody just says, oh, you know, this is what we're going to go through. They kind of prepare them for it. The heart rate, the hormone levels begin to level out. But that's something all of us face. And the reason I'm saying this, I don't want us to just say stress is stress is stress. It is not. It is not. There's all kinds of levels of stress, but begin to look and engage how your children respond to these. The next one is the more tolerable stress. These are temporary responses to it that could, they're things like natural disasters. You even hear about something awful that's happened outside of you, but it's not directly happening to you. You could hear something on the news, it could upset you. It could be a bad injury. You could fall, you could fall off a bike or fall off skating or something like that and have an injury, see your own blood. It does cause some brain reaction. It does cause some challenges or constrictions in the organ systems of the body. But nevertheless, here again, if the parent, the father, is doing some kind of buffering to reassure, to reintroduce safety, to take care of it medically if needs to be the case, to give them a way to say, we're going to figure this out, we're going to be okay, then it prevents some of the damaging effects that begins to happen to the body. I'm going to show you that in just a moment. The body goes into an instant constriction when anything happens. The father's role, the powerful role he has, is to buffer. When I say buffer, is to use some kind of verbal first aid. That's what Rachel Michelson talks about. That begins to calm the child. And then so the heart rate, the blood pressure, the central nervous system can begin to regulate relatively quickly, or may take a little bit longer. But again, you're gauging your child and how long and how much it takes for them to regulate again. The toxic stress, that's the thing we're most concerned about. That's what we're most concerned about when it comes to this. It can occur when exposed to violence. If the system is disrupted and the development of the brain architecture and other organ systems are disrupted, there is an increased risk for stress-related diseases, and they are enormous, like heart disease and diabetes and substance abuse and obviously depression. And depression shows up, let me say this, in different ways. Some children, it depends on personality, it could depend on their developmental stage at a given time, that some children go pretty insular. They kind of isolate, they kind of shut down under depression. Some children be completely the reverse. They could be very reactive, they could be very aggressive, they could be snap back, hostile, want to fight back. That too could be depression. It's not always like sleeping and not being able to face the world, but it's a fight back, an anger and a rage that is unresolved. Again, it is critical for the dad, as early as possible, as quickly as possible, to begin to do something to soothe the damage. First, understand that there's a damaging effect. First, understand that that toxic stress response leads to more damage to the child's brain and the body, but to begin to do something to buffer that. And I think the last few things you kept saying, Reggie and Kevin, is to talk to the child, say something to the child, calm the child, reassure the child, and come up with a plan to let them know that you're in charge of that situation. But believe them, believe them, believe them. However they experiencing it is their truth. Don't try to downplay it. Don't try to analyze it in any way. It's just the way they have experienced it they need your help with. So acknowledge that. Again, I said you could use these on a flip chart one at a time and get feedback from the group members and how they perceive and separate and distinguish those different levels of stress in your child. Any questions on that? Let me know. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics for Black and Brown children in the United States, racism begins before they're born. I was struck by this statement, and I basically know this statement because I'm remembering some of the historical things that were passed down in my own family, the impacts, their physical and mental and emotional health is already shaped to some extent. My father, and I didn't tell you as part of my introduction, one of the reasons I've been with the Father's Course since the beginning, I am the ultimate daddy's girl. My mother died when we were children. And my father raised 3 daughters. He didn't send for somebody else to raise us. So I know the capacity of men to take care of children, and I know how powerful the shaping is by it. Nevertheless, my father's racism experiences played a large role in shaping our childhood. For instance, he had experienced the lynching, not police stop, but being his father taken out and killed by people who didn't think that he should be able to build a log cabin for his family. And when my father's older brother helped the family sustain and stay together by working 3 and 4 jobs, they decided that they were going to stop that too. So they came and got him and took him to the city square and beat him half to death and burned him alive. My father experienced those. And so my father had this issue. It was many things that he said that Denise and I were not able to do, but one of them was to ever say the word what. What means is that my father said that when I call you, I don't care if you're reading, I don't care if you're doing your homework, I don't care if you're in the bathroom. He says, I want you not ever to say what, I want you to come running, because my father grew up in a place where they needed to run for cover, to run for protection. And see, that became part of our lives, so much to the extent that sometimes as a grown woman, I'd be in a supermarket and I'd be someplace and I see people and their children, and the mother or the father would call the child and the child would say, what? And I had such a visceral reaction. But see, there's a historical innate memory to people's earlier experiences with oppression. And that gets translated, it gets transferred, or we call that transgenerational transfer, that way of being to their children, but it did shape my life. So it was always there. It was always there. Racial violence, as Dr. Berkeley also said, is a trauma. Please understand that. When we see it, what we saw on Mr. Floyd, what we see on any of the news images, when we see school shootings, whatever we see, the history of violence for us is a much higher, creates a much higher dose of toxicity. I want you to understand this too. It builds up. Toxic stress says this: stress is repetitive. It comes back, it replays, because of the memory imprints, they will always be there. The body never forgets, the mind never forgets. But as subsequent things happen in the life of the children, whether it happens to them directly or they hear about it in the external world just slightly outside of themselves, it becomes an accumulative thing. It piles up, it stacks on top. It becomes a compounded set of circumstances in their lives. And it exacerbates this system that, whether you realize it or not, they are hyper alert, hyper vigilant, hyper ramped up. No matter what you see, it may be so subtle, it may be so under the current, but it is there. With it is the one thing you don't see, and that's the chemical reaction, the chemistry that's going on in their brain and body that is detrimental to their health and their well-being. This chronic activation of stress hormones leads to inflammation in the body. Do you know that inflammation is a perfect host for all kinds of virus and bacteria to take host and ramp up and work in your body? It predisposes them to physical and a host, all kinds of physical and mental health problems. If there's any questions, let me know. But let's begin to look at some
Beverly,
of this.
we've got one question.
Yes, yes.
This is from Brooke. She said, I am curious to hear your guidance on how to help the father to self-identify that they may have experienced toxic stress and they may experience those high responses at the same time that their child does. How do they buffer when they themselves need buffering?
Okay, actually, it was one of my slides, but I'm going to stop and
she said that at the beginning of her question, that you may get to this later.
But I want to reflect that question because it's important. What that means is, and some of the questions sometimes I've asked when I was actually training at Father's Core, is for a person to know where you are, to know what some of your own issues are, and to be forthcoming with it. The Department of Defense taught us two things. That when something happens in your history that is traumatic, and I don't care how small, or you may say it's insignificant, or this happens to everybody, I want us to stop minimizing stress, because see, there was no healing from slavery, and there was no healing from Jim Crow, and there was no healing from the civil rights stuff and all the things that went wrong, and there's no healing for what's going on now. So all of that stuff is there. It's there, it's stored, it's stacked in the central nervous system, in the muscles, in the cellular system, various parts of the brain, which I'm about to show you in a moment. They said that you must process it and you must integrate it. Process it and integrate it before you can fully move forward on a path to healing. You'll never be healed because you'll never forget it, but you could reach a level of coping. And one of the things, and I'm gonna pick on men a little bit right here, is many of the men have been raised or oriented not to talk and not to process their struggle, their challenge, their hurt, their pain. And it's something we want to help them get over. That's why I love group, because the minute Kevin's sitting in a group and he said, I feel effed up about this and this and this, that opens up the door for somebody else to feel, say, yeah, I'm struggling with that too. Yeah, I'm going through the same thing. I'm not handling that. I don't know what to say. And I don't like to admit that I'm scared. And I don't like to admit that I'm vulnerable. Yeah, but the men in a group process gets an opportunity. And when that opens up, you let that flow. But they must process it. They must talk. They must go back to the awful thing that has happened and deal with it so that they could minimize or mitigate the intensity of how bad they feel. As long as it's intense, it is driving their behavior. It's driving their thinking. When you talk about it and address it, you desensitize it so that you could acknowledge that it's there, but it's not controlling, it's not ruling you. See, the part of the treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder is for Kevin, for Reggie, for whomever, to be able to remember something has happened, but without re-experiencing it to the extent that it's controlling and ruling their thinking, their behavior. So I hope that answers you some. That must happen. The other thing is to integrate. The integration says you want to recognize the external thing that's causing an internal distress. The way the body remembers trauma, the way it first of all experiences trauma, is the activation of the five senses. The body will always remember what it saw, what it heard, what it felt, what it tasted, what it smelt at that moment of stress. It will always remember that. And so obviously when you hear a police siren, it could be miles away from you, got nothing to do with you, it triggers something in the body and the chemical begins to flow. When you hear a congestion of people and there's a crowd, and it could be actually fun, but it sounds like they're laughing, a little bit screaming and laughing and stuff like that, it triggers something because there was some sounds related to whatever the case is. Or when my mother was cooking something the day that she died, my mother had a habit of burning like lemon peels or orange peels on the stove, particularly that she cooked some fresh fish and it was smelling a little bit. And that's that scent, which is actually a very pleasant scent. But that scent, for me to smell that later, will bring me right back to the day she died. Does that make sense to you? The body remembers that way. But if I could recognize what is triggering, if the father could recognize what is triggering feelings that he can't put his finger on, and once he recognized it, he could say, okay, yeah, this is coming up for me now. Okay, but I'm gonna be okay because this is not related to what's going on. Let me calm myself, let me settle myself, let me regulate myself, I'm gonna be okay. See, because he's in control of what he can recognize. You're not in control if you don't recognize what's going on, what's triggering. See, the skill set is identify what triggers. Then you can manage the trigger. Kevin may say, I need to give myself a few moments before I answer these kids because they're about to get on my last nerve. Whew, let me take a walk, let me take a breath and soothe that part of your body. There's always a stress response someplace in the body, in the head, whatever, that's related to what you're feeling or the new stressor. When you recognize that, Brian posted, sometimes you just put your hand over it and you breathe into it and soothe it and say, this is going to be okay. I'm going to be all right. I'm going to be all right. So that's part of the process, but the father has to recognize what's going on for him. I hope I answered that. Brooke, you could give us a yay or nay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Beverly, it looks like your screen, you need
I
to go
know.
full screen.
Yeah, something flipped over.
There you go.
Yeah, Dara's going to help me get this together later. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at some of the brain systems I want you to understand. And this is something I designed this in simplicity to share with the fathers in the group. I share this with people who don't even have a high school education. It's just basic. It's not the whole brain system, but it's enough to know the trajectory of the stress hormone for the child and where you could help them as the father, as a parent, to regulate the system. It begins here, this little part called, can you see my cursor? Yes, okay. It begins here, this little part called the amygdala. Make a note to yourself that this is your warning, your alert, your alarm system. This is a really important part of the brain because it warns you. It lets you know something is about to happen. It scans. And what it does is when it notices everything, it doesn't need your help. It's its job, because it's all about your survival. To help you survive, it sends out that stress hormone, that chemical all over the place to say, watch it. Now, it has tons of memory of everything that's ever happened to you from the time you were in your mother's womb. But it is not a discriminator. Like I said, it could be any of those other little minor stresses like surprises your birthday. That it doesn't make that decision. It just sends out the chemical all over the place to say, watch it. Oh no, this is about to happen. When it hears that sound, when it sees that smell, when it just feels or senses anything. Now, among the places to get that chemical, which is called the stress hormone, is this little guy over here called the hippocampus. This is really, really critical. And this is where dads teach them that you're going to work on the most. The hippocampus also has a ton of memory. But the hippocampus now is a modulator. When I say modulator, it is the part that's supposed to address that stress by pushing it back and say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is not that bad, or maybe this is bad, and this is what you maybe should do. But it should be able to control the stress hormone, slow it down, provided dad has prepared that child to be better in control of that situation. Why? Because, see, the hippocampus has 4 primary functions, and please make a note of these, because this is going to determine your child's reactions most of the time, or their responses. The hippocampus is responsible for critical thinking. It's responsible for rational thinking. It's responsible for problem solving, and it's responsible for short-term memory. You know how many times you tell your children something over and over and over again, but at the time that they need it, they don't even remember what the heck you said because it is flooded with the chemical. Now, see, when you teach your child to regulate to calm, then the hippocampus can slow down the chemical coming out of the amygdala. But when they're not, you've left it up to them to navigate this world by themselves. All the challenges, struggles, the traumas, the upsets and downs. Then the amygdala is flooding that system and it knocks the hippocampus. It can't slow it down. It's like the difference when, when I was a kid in New York City and we didn't live in our suburbs, we didn't have no pool, but the firemen used to come and put this little cap on our fire hydrant and the water used to spray out there and we'd be standing up there backstroking and everything. That was in the hottest months of the year. That was fine. That was manageable. We could play in that spray. But then I had a friend named Vervie, and she was impatient, and she would go get her father's wrench, and she opened up that bad boy before the fireman comes, and that water came blasting out. And so we couldn't stand up and play. It kind of knocked you down. That's kind of like a visual difference. When you teach a child to regulate and calm, then it's a spray of chemical that the hippocampus could manage and then perform its functions. But when you let the child manage all this stuff on their own, then it's so blasted with that chemical that the hippocampus gets knocked out of kilter. Now, what Dr. Bruce Perry would say to you, when the hippocampus is out of control, it almost cannot follow cognitive instructions. So the police says, well, calm down and move your hand, or don't do this and don't do this. The child can't even respond to that, not in a proper way, because it is out of control with it. Now, I want you to understand that. So you want them to be able to slow down the chemicals so that they could think, problem solve, remember what to do in that situation. You've told them time and time and time again, but it's not there. Now, whether the hippocampus could function or not, it's going to send a communication over to the orbital frontal cortex. Now, over there, highest order of social functioning is how they feel about something, how they think about something, and ultimately how they're going to behave in those situations. If the hippocampus is regulated, the orbital frontal cortex and says, well, this is what dad said to do in this situation. Or if you hear the police coming and you know it's about to be a trouble, you need to leave the place right away. But the police are already there and they see you. Well, you don't run at that point. And dad said, you don't do this. And your dad said, see, that thing is operating. But when, again, they're not prepared, they're not trained, they're not drilled by you, they're not informed by you, the hippocampus is out of control, it's flooded with the stress hormone, then the information goes over here, will have the child purely reactive and unwittingly, and maybe beyond their control, put themselves into a difficult situation, a life-threatening situation. Here is your goal. Teach the fathers here to work here. This is where they lend insight. This is where you have suggestions. This is where you have inserts of game plans. The very existing scenarios that Reggie gave you, this is what you do in this situation with a car stop, or you're stopping on the street, or there's a crowd, you need to go the other way. You lend the insight. You begin to build up memory imprints. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to work all the time. If you can think about yourself, that sometimes in a crisis, you are surprised about how you react or don't, that's possible. But the more information that is in here, there's a better opportunity that your child can say, oh, even calm themselves before the situation gets intense. You get pulled over. So immediately you go into your calm down. Okay, dad said. Then no matter as the situation escalates, there's a greater possibility that the child will not escalate with the police officer that is beginning to be increasingly out of control. This is your game plan. So let me know if you have any questions on this, because let's look at also what's happening in the whole body system. At the very split second that the amygdala is sending that chemical all over the brain, because it touches many, many more places, it's going down to the neural circuitry into what we call a gut reaction. Instantaneously, it doesn't ask your permission, it doesn't wait for you, and the body goes into instant constriction. It braces for the worst. It's sort of like people say it's a freeze or a frozen. It's almost like sometimes for some kids, it could be a catatonic state. But remember too, the brain is not giving them good instructions. But in that, all of the systems in the body, the organs are in trouble. The tracheal, the bronchial, the lung, the heart, the blood vessels, the liver, the kidneys, the stomach, all of it is being constricted because see, there's fascia tissue wrapped around the skeletal muscular structure. And at the moment that something happens, even when you anticipate, even when you hear trouble coming from a distance, a siren, or you see the light of that police car flashing behind you, the body braces for the worst, and that fascia tissue gets tighter. You see, now laying between the fascia tissue, the skin, the fascia tissue in the muscular structure, the skeletal structure, are something called capillaries, you see. And as the child gets increasingly intense, increasingly upset, increasingly afraid or angry, that tissue gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and it chokes the capillaries. And as it chokes the capillaries, then the organs and systems that are involved, they are losing oxygen-rich blood. That's how illnesses begin. You see. Now, this is automatic, like I said, instantaneous. See something, hear something, feel something, experience something, even smell something. For the child to begin to relax, where things begin to flow and move as they should, so the body can begin to calm, clear, relax, regulate. This doesn't happen unless the child does something. But here's where you get to do. You buffer, you calm, you say something, or whoever is with them might say, we're gonna figure this out. Remember what your dad said. Let's just keep your mouth shut. Whew. Let's wait for your father to get there. Let's wait for your lawyer to get there. No, this is what we're gonna do. Just be cool. That's the only way that the relaxation can begin to be in place. Certainly by the time you're with them, you want to do everything you can, say everything you can, use those verbal first aid words, the reassurances, even praise them for being wise enough not to say anything to the police to escalate the situation, then the body begins to go back. But to leave it, believe it, you have allowed the child to move from a state of dis-ease to disease state in their body. If there's any questions, let me know. I'm moving to the next slide, but that's some of what happens. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that parents proactively engage around these events, prepare them before, and take into account also your child's age and their development. I think that all children who've experienced some traumatic experience are not necessarily functioning age appropriate. Is a system or syndrome, excuse me, called stress regress syndrome. Once something has happened, it kind of kicks them back to performing life at an age below where they should do in terms of their developmental performance. Understand that's the case. So part of what dad's role is, and you talk to them about this in group, is understand where your child is. They could be 15 years old, but when they're really, really traumatized, I mean, you find yourself almost talking to a 9-year-old. And dad needs to remember not to say at your age, damn it. That's not what you do. You need to talk to the 9-year-old who's under so much stress until they calm down and feel protected by you, supported by you, affirmed by you, for them to relax enough to begin to come back up to more age appropriate response. But that stress regress, it even happened to veterans. I would be sitting there in my office talking to somebody 30 years old, and something happened on the way to the office that reminded them that something that happened on the battlefield. It could be a smell, a sound, or whatever the case is. So usually like it was a helicopter coming over. And I'm talking to somebody who's like 18 years old. So that's who I need to address to help calm and regulate, to reassure until they could come back up to more age appropriate. Fathers, please help them to understand that. As a parent, I want you to always assume, because I don't believe in assumptions in many other situations, but there's no way in the world we could think that our children are not aware of what's happening in the nation. Is this no way? Whether they heard it from somebody else, they certainly hear about stuff in school. They may or may not have it on news, depending on what you have in your, but they are happening, and so they're aware of it in some way. So help them frame, talk about it, but frame them in age appropriate ways. Again, talk to whatever age level your child is performing at that time, so that they can understand it. It makes sense. Get feedback, check in with that. Well, what do you think about what I just said? Or what did you understand me to say? What did you hear me to say? And do that in a way that's non-threatening. But we should be having these conversations now. People sometimes too often like to wait until after something has happened to address something, and all the science, all of the social services people, trauma specialists in my field say, have the conversations now. Children hear your conversations. They see video stuff on the media. You may want to check in with them and see what they're looking at. And don't do it in a way that they feel like they need to hide it from you. Do it in a way that they feel safe. And I never believed that they should have these videos and these computers all in secret places. There should be some family community. And I don't believe in child privacy either, because they don't pay no rent and no mortgage. So I want to see what they're looking. But I've come at them, and my baby just turned 49, and we did okay. But I came at them in such a way that they didn't feel like they needed to hide it. I just wanted them to be safe, to let me know what they're looking at so I could stay on top of it. But they need to also know what the protests mean, why people have been killed. And Reggie, again, spelled that out for you. Talk about it. Talk about it. Part of that means to find out where they are about it. What do they need? What is their understanding of it? What is their perception, their perspective of it? What kind of stereotypes do they have, or belief systems do they have? Listen more in those situations than you talk, so that you can learn where they are. Parents of Black and brown children should acknowledge that people are treated differently. Give them the history. Reggie told you it's all there. Let them know the differences in what happens with people with skin that is Black and brown. Share examples of this happening. I have the men in the group. share some experiences of their own, if they will, but encourage them to do it and learn to listen. That also teaches and informs that people are shaped based on the sum total of their experiences. And when you open up those kind of groups discussions, there's no argument and there's no debate about it. It's just simply a dialogue. If I'm listening to Kevin, whatever he says, it may not make any sense to the norm of my life and my experience. I don't care. That's not the important thing. That's his experience. That's his. So teach them to listen to that with each other and not to certainly listen to it, the child. Here's what you were talking about, Brooke. The adults need to tune into their own emotions. Own emotions. Now, my father had some interesting things in terms of when he said things to us, because he used to drill Denise and I. We practiced things. We also had a period, because he grew up in Valdosta, Georgia, and Titusville, Florida. That's where his father and his brother was murdered, lynched. Let me be really clear, because that's very, very different than murder. It was not friends that did that. This was people in white robes that didn't think that they should have what they should have and do what they should do. But in an age appropriate way, he let us know part of what they would also do is snatch little brown girls and rape them, beat them half to death. And nobody was ever going to court. Nobody was going to court about that, even if people had witnessed that thing. And so he told us and prepared us if we got surrounded by a situation, what to do, how to get the advantage if we can, how to run, or to just simply submit so we could stay alive. Will you imagine telling your kids that? He says, because his backup with that, he says, well, if they could do whatever they do to their body, but they can't do anything with your mind if you don't let them, you educate yourself, you prepare yourself. My dad put that insert in there, but certainly to prepare us. I think one of the worst things we could do in this day and age is to let our children walk around naive, thinking that, there's fairness. If I'm nice to people, they're going to be nice to me. No, that's not the case to do. If you have not asked, ask and help your child deal with the trauma and emotional impact of these images. Be truthful with them. Top of the threat, as we're talking about today, is about police violence and the interactions as a result of that. Understand, know where your child is psychologically, emotionally, and physically at all time. Not to do that. The illnesses, the resulting illnesses in the brain and in the body lead to severe illnesses and or death, even if not at the hands of the police, just the sicknesses that could happen in their bodies.
Beverly, I hate to jump in. I just want to give you a time check. You got about 5 minutes, okay?
Then I want to shift to this. I want to shift to the video because I found that this was one of the most powerful, and I need you to move to that for me, Vervi.
Right, just stop sharing your screen and then I can show the video.
Yeah, this is one of the most powerful conversations that I saw, and I think many of you may have seen it, about how to talk to a child. And even though this child, I think he was something like 7 or 8 years old, this is the same conversation that happened with a teenager, but these were how parents prepared them. So you can take that away.
Okay.
William George Bailey Jones. I'm 13 years old, and I have nothing to harm you. That's good news. Always have to show the police where your hands are, and always say what you're doing before you do it.
Control of your emotions, right? Respectful.
Yeah, don't fight back. Don't talk back. Do not make any sudden moves. Remember, your only goal is to get home safely.
If you get detained, don't sign anything or write anything. Wait for a parent before you talk.
If your white friends are saying things or mouthing off, know that you cannot. You can't go climbing through windows, play with toy guns, throw rocks, and you cannot ever run away from them, no matter how afraid you are.
Never run.
Everything that we're saying to you, we're saying because we want you to come home again. We want you to grow up to be anything and everything that you want to be. Hear me?
If you manage a team, you have to try it.
You're
You're-
muted. You're muted, Beverly.
Thank you. One of the most important parts of that conversation is not only that they told him what to do and what not to do, what never to do, is they came back and buffered by building him back up. Because in a sense, we're telling our children to allow themselves to be disrespected so they could come home alive. Please understand that. And I'm okay with that. That hurts like the dickens. One of my friends said, we're double teaching our children. Most of us would like to raise white privilege says that you demand respect. My husband unwillingly thought he should demand respect. But to buffer that, she said, allow yourself to be disrespectful. Remember, you come home because you have great value to bring to the world. They then turned around and built him up of how important he is, how precious he was, the potential for his life. My baby made 49. He's doing extraordinary things out there because I told him when the police showed up and when they were children, see, they could be we lived in a kind of suburban area, and sometimes the kids would be playing and bumping into somebody's fence or the ball hit somebody's window and the other white kids would run. And I told my kids, if the police come, you lay down on the ground, prostrate, and don't you move. Don't you move. But he did that. Now he's working with other kids at age 49 because he made it. That's the point. You build back something for them. To the end, I want to say this too. I love media to be used in a positive way. And what the last page of your presentation that Kevin's going to send you was a list of movies. I believe in getting books and stuff like that. That's powerful to do. Yet I find imaging sometimes has a more powerful way. I put some movies here that I would like you to review because they go through various issues and you kind of pick out the segments. The beauty of using the movies is that you can put it on pause and stop and discuss. What did you see? What do you think? And talk about those issues. I had movies on there like The Great Debaters with Denzel Washington. Beale Street will let you know about how important Reggie said it is for your child not to talk when the police take him in. Okay. Also, how they see us. Write that down because I left that out. How they see us, what happened to the Central Park, how the information was distorted, lied on, so those children spent all that time in prison. Write that down because I left that off the list. You want to look at 42, how somebody allowed himself, Jackie Robinson, I used to work for him, to be called the N-word, called horrible things, but he held his dignity in place, nevertheless, to achieve what he did. That's on there. All the other movies are there, LaDonna. You don't have to write. I just said write down how they see us. That's what I left out. There's a movie called Pride, The Titans, The Long Walk Home. This also involved women, The Long Home, because don't forget Brianna, a whole bunch of women been shot and killed too. And I can't understand why. And I didn't hope that her boyfriend gets shot, but if he was the one who was with the gun and the police felt threatened, how did she get shot? How does she get shot? Does that make sense? So yeah, so it's a variety of, look at Hidden Figures. One of my great angsts, we grew up in, well, we didn't grow up, but my father grew up part of the time in Titusville, Florida. And we were near the space station. Cape Canaveral it used to be called. And my uncle who had rheumatic fever, he was a gardener on the station. And sometimes Denise and I would go over there on Saturdays with him, but we could walk around certain areas in the lobby. And there were 3 Black women, their photos. I'm talking about back in the 50s. Nobody in the world knew that the space achievement was on the backs of Black people, the accomplishments of Black people. There's brown people out there too. Build your children up with those kinds of videos and films and those kinds of resources. So that's what I wanted to share. That's what I wanted to share. And that's all I have time to say now. I hope that's of help, but they understand what's happening, prepare them, drill them, come up with plans, contingency plans, pour that in. All the science, as I work with schizophrenics for years, they say if you say something almost at least 7 times, practice something about 7 times at minimal, that is a better chance for them to anchor that information in the hippocampus so that it may be usable. It may come to the surface when they need it the most. And so with that, I'm going to say good afternoon.
Thank you very much, Beverly. Thank you so much. Reggie, we appreciate you guys and the information that you shared. Really quick, there are a couple of links in the chat. There's a link to our next dad discussions convening, which is next Thursday evening, 6 p.m. to 7:30. So you can promote that with your fathers. The focus of that dad discussions is activism, social justice and activism, excuse me. Also, there's a link to the survey, the Get Feedback survey. If you can please respond to those, we use that information to help improve our trainings and just to get feedback from you on what, if the information that was shared today was helpful. I want to say that's it because it is 12:59. Again, I want to thank our presenters, a wealth of information, and thank you guys for spending your Thursday late morning and early afternoon with us. Again, keep an eye out for information on the mini grant application. Those are supposed to be made available on October 26th. I want to say that's it. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again very soon. The application information session is on October 30th, but you guys will get all of those announcements via your email. So thank you. Have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your week. Good to see you guys.